Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. His wife said, "Do not call me. I am not your property." He replied, "Perfect. Then do not come home." What he did next broke her. "Do not call me again, Rashad. I am not your property." Those were the last words Serena Cole said to her husband before ending the call, laughter and music still spilling through the line like an open secret. She had no idea that the man she had just dismissed would turn that moment into the quietest turning point of their marriage. What happened in the days that followed would test what pride, silence, and the idea of freedom could truly destroy. The afternoon grew pale when Serena walked into the dining room. The smell of baked chicken and roasted potatoes lingered, the kind of meal Rashad looked forward to after long hours drafting architectural proposals. He sat at the table, sleeves rolled, the day's exhaustion still written on his face. She stood across from him, hands folded over her apron, eyes drifting toward the window instead of him. Dinner began with small talk about a neighbor's new car, the hydrangeas out back, and the city traffic. Nothing that mattered. Beneath Serena's voice, Rashad sensed a rehearsed calm, the kind that precedes something unsettling. Halfway through the meal, she cleared her throat and said, "Rashad, there is something I want to tell you." He looked up, waiting. She said, "I have been thinking. I need a little time for myself." He set his fork down slowly. "Time for yourself?" She nodded quickly, as if she had to say it before her courage dissolved. "Yes, just a short break. I was thinking of going on a trip with some friends. Maybe 2 weeks, just to relax. Nothing serious." His gaze held steady, his tone controlled. "What kind of friends?" "Just the girls," she said. "Nadia, Faith, maybe Janelle. We have been talking about it for months. Everyone needs to breathe. Rashad, I have been here for years, cooking, tidying, living the same days on repeat." He leaned back, studying her. "And you think 2 weeks away fixes that?" Her eyes hardened. "It is not running away. It is taking a break. I have earned that right." He did not speak for a while. Silence stretched between them, taut as a rope that could snap with one wrong word. "Serena," he said finally, his tone low but firm, "I'm not comfortable with this." She asked why. "Do you not trust me?" He replied, "This is not about trust. It is principle. You are my wife. You cannot just wake up one day and decide to disappear for 2 weeks without a reason we share." She pushed her plate aside, frustration clouding her face. "See, that is the problem. You think everything I do requires your permission. I think marriage requires consideration," he replied calmly. "You do not make decisions that affect both of us without a conversation. I call that respect." The words hung in the air. She said nothing. She stood, lifted her wine glass, and walked toward the kitchen. The clink of glass on the counter sounded sharper than it should have. Rashad rose and followed. "You can take a day if you need to," he said softly from the doorway. "Go visit your mother. Spend time with family. But 2 weeks away from home, no. I cannot agree to that." She turned around, leaning against the counter, her face unreadable. "You make it sound like I'm asking to leave the country. It is just Miami Beach, Rashad. Everyone takes vacations. Everyone does not abandon their home to go find themselves," he said. "You are impossible." "Maybe," he said, "but I am consistent." The hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet. She brushed past him and went upstairs without another word. He stood there in the kitchen for a while, staring at the doorway she had vanished through. He was not angry. Anger was too simple. What he felt was heavier, quieter. When he returned to the table, her seat was empty, the candle still burning low beside her half-eaten meal. He sat and finished what was left of dinner in silence, every bite tasting more of truth than salt. Later that night, he found her on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She did not look up when he entered. "You are really not going to support me on this, are you?" she asked flat. "No," he said simply. "I am not." She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh and returned to her screen. The light from the phone reflected on her face, and for the first time in years Rashad realized he was looking at a stranger wearing his wife's skin. He turned away and walked upstairs, each step slow and deliberate, the kind of silence that comes when a man begins to prepare for the end of something he had built with his whole heart. The days that followed drifted like slow smoke, quiet and uneasy. The tension from that dinner clung to the house, invisible but heavy enough to bend the air. Serena spoke less, moved differently, smiled in fragments that never reached her eyes. Rashad noticed, but said nothing. He went to work, came home, and sat across from her in a silence that said more than words ever could. Sometimes she tried to sound light, humming while she cooked, but her laughter always arrived a beat late, as if rehearsed. A week passed. On Thursday morning the air was unusually still. Serena woke early, made his coffee, kissed his cheek, and said she would step out later to visit her mother. Her tone was sweet, deliberate, almost soft enough to deceive. Rashad did not question her. He held her eyes for a moment before heading to the office. "Drive safe," he said. She smiled, a gentle, distant smile that hid something behind it. The evening traffic crawled without urgency, and by the time he reached home, Rashad felt a familiar ache for meetings and phone calls. He thought about the aroma of her stew that usually filled the kitchen by now, the faint hum of the gospel station she liked to leave on. But when he pushed open the front door, the house greeted him with silence. Not peace, silence. He flicked on the lights and stood at the threshold. The dining table was clear, the counters bare. Her sandals, usually tossed by the hallway, were gone. The faint perfume she wore still lingered, but the house already felt larger, hollow, as though someone had pulled its heart out. "Serena," he called. His voice echoed faintly through the living room. He dropped his keys on the side table and checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the patio. Nothing. He opened the closet. Half her clothes were missing. Her jewelry box stood open, lighter than it should be. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang twice before she picked up. The background sounded busy. Music, laughter, wind. Her tone was light, almost careless. "Rashad, why are you calling?" "Because I came home and you are not here," he said, steady. "Where are you, Serena?" "I told you I was going on a trip," she replied, irritation cutting through her words. "Why are you stalking me? I am not your property. Do not call me. I will be back after the trip." There was a short pause, the kind that separates emotion from decision. Rashad's voice came calm, flat, and final. "Then do not bother to come back." Before she could answer, he ended the call. He stood in the center of the living room, the phone a weight in his hand, staring at nothing. The refrigerator hummed. The wall clock ticked, counting the seconds of something dying quietly inside him. He walked to the study and called Malcolm Boyd, a private investigator he had used once years ago. When Malcolm answered, his voice was calm, clipped, businesslike. "Boyd speaking." "It is Cole," Rashad said. "My wife is in Florida. Find out where she really is, who she is with, where she stays, everything." "Understood," Malcolm replied. "Same procedure. Faster this time," Rashad said. "No delays. I want the truth on my desk before the weekend." He hung up, shut off the study light, and stood by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered along the quiet Atlanta suburb. Somewhere a dog barked, then fell silent. Rashad pressed his hand to the cool glass and exhaled. Serena had left once before, years ago, only for a night after an argument over money. She had returned then, tearful and apologetic. This time, the tone in her voice told him that whatever she returned would not be the same. Downstairs, her favorite mug sat by the sink, a ring of lipstick around the rim. He picked it up, washed it carefully, and set on the rack to dry. He moved slowly through the house, switching off lights one by one, as though performing a ritual for something already gone. By midnight he sat in the living room, the faint glow from the street lamps spilling through the curtains. The world outside slept, but his mind remained awake, running through memories that suddenly felt like lies dressed as love. He whispered to himself, not in anger, but in realization. She does not know what she just started. Morning arrived without the sound of her voice. The house, stripped of her presence, had a strange stillness that made even running water sound too loud. Rashad stood in the kitchen, drinking lukewarm coffee, his thoughts organized in quiet precision. He did not call her again. He did not text. He went about his day as if nothing had changed. But everything had. At the office, his assistant noticed how focused he seemed. The same man who used to hum, while sketching, now worked in complete silence. His eyes were sharp, deliberate, detached. He met clients, signed contracts, smiled when necessary, and kept his composure like a man who had decided emotion was a luxury he could no longer afford. By the third day, an envelope arrived. It was delivered discreetly, just before noon, by a young courier in a dark jacket, who greeted him with a nod and left. Rashad locked his office door before opening it. Inside were photographs, clear and undeniable. Serena, her hair pulled back the way he had always liked, stood on a balcony beside another man. A tall man, broad-shouldered, an expensive watch glinting under the sun. In one photo, her head tilted against his shoulder, smiling. In another, she sat in his lap with a smile that could cut glass. Beneath the photographs was a small black flash drive, unmarked and thin. Rashad plugged it into his laptop. The screen filled with motion and sound. The low hum of an ocean breeze, faint laughter, a camera held steady from a distance. The first clip showed them stepping out of a car at a beachfront hotel in Miami Beach. She wore the white sundress Rashad had bought for their last anniversary. The man's hand slid around her waist as they entered the lobby, his fingers resting where a wedding ring used to mean something. The next cut showed them on a balcony, her body turned into his as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then the kiss came, unhurried, deliberate, final. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 8:17 p.m. He did not stop the video. He watched them enter the hotel suite together and watched the elevator doors close, the hallway returning to silence. Then he shut the laptop. No fury, no drama, just stillness, so cold it became clarity. Beneath the photographs lay a report. Dates, locations, hotel reservations, dinner receipts, all under the name Serena Cole. She had not even bothered to use an alias. He sat back and stared at the photos, not with shock, but with the slow realization that every suspicion he had dismissed was now laid bare before him. He felt no rage, only the final confirmation that love, when broken, does not explode. It crumbles into facts. He gathered the photographs neatly into the envelope and called Malcolm. "It is done," the detective said. "I saw the photos," Rashad replied, level and measured. "Thank you." Malcolm paused, then spoke more softly. "I have been doing this for 20 years. Some men break when they see the truth. You sound like you were waiting for it." "I was," Rashad said, and ended the call. He sat at his desk, letting the stillness surround him. Then he opened his planner and began to write, not grievances or questions, but actions. It was how his mind worked. He solved problems by structure. At the top of the page, he wrote a single word: closure. When he returned home that evening, the house greeted him the same way, quiet, untouched. Her framed pictures still lined the hallway, smiling at him from another life. He walked through each room slowly, not with grief, but with steady detachment. In the bedroom, her vanity mirror held traces of her. A brush with strands of hair, perfume bottles arranged by color, a half-open jewelry box. He reached out and shut the lid softly, as though closing a chapter that no longer needed to be read again. The next morning he called his lawyer, Gerald Porter, a man who had been both advisor and old college friend. "Rashad, it has been a while," Gerald said, his voice warm but curious. "What can I do for you?" "I need to start a process," Rashad said. "A quiet one." "Divorce." "Yes." "Do you have grounds?" "Adultery." "I will send you evidence, along with a copy of our prenuptial agreement. Then we will make it swift," Gerald replied. "I will draft the first papers tonight. Do you want me to notify her formally?" "Send everything through me first." After hanging up, Rashad stared at the ceiling a long moment. He was not thinking about betrayal anymore. He was thinking about logistics, and how order had always been his armor against chaos. This was not revenge. Not yet. It was preparation, and preparation was a language he spoke fluently. By evening he called the locksmith. The man arrived within the hour, carrying new locks and spare keys. "Moving in or moving out?" the locksmith asked lightly. "Neither," Rashad said. "Just securing what is mine." He watched as the locks were replaced, one at the front door, one at the back, one for the garage. Each turn of the screwdriver sounded final. When the man left, Rashad sat on the staircase, the new keys heavy in his hand. He felt the faint hum of something he had not felt in months. Not joy, certainty. In the stillness of that night, he packed the rest of her belongings. He moved slowly with purpose, folding her clothes carefully, wrapping her jewelry in tissue, placing everything in boxes. He did not throw anything away. He was not angry. He simply wanted no trace of her in a home she had chosen to abandon. When the final box was sealed, he leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. Somewhere between heartbreak and relief, he understood what freedom sounded like. Not a scream, not a song, just silence deep enough to hear his own resolve. The papers were not yet signed, but the part of him that had once waited for her was gone. The only question now was what he would do next. Days passed, and the silence in Rashad's house took on a new shape. Not the silence of loss, but of order. He moved through his mornings with ritual calm, coffee, paperwork, a brief call with Gerald, then hours at the office where everything ran with mechanical ease. He no longer carried the weight of what had happened. He had accepted it the way one accepts the weather, unchangeable and indifferent. On the fifth morning, Gerald called to say the documents were ready. Everything is clean, airtight, prepared where it should be, Gerald told him. You only need to come by and sign. Rashad drove to the firm just before noon. The day was bright, and the city moved with the rhythm of people whose lives had not fallen apart. In the conference room, the documents were laid out neatly on polished oak, two witnesses waiting in quiet professionalism. He picked up the pen, read the line beginning with his full name, and signed. No hesitation, no second read, just a line drawn with steady conviction, closing 5 years of a life he no longer recognized. Gerald watched him curiously. You sure you do not want to wait until she is back in town? These things can. Rashad slipped the pen into its holder and said quietly, no. She made her decision before she left. I'm making mine official. The drive home felt longer than it was. When he arrived, he loaded luggage, boxes, and everything that represented her into the trunk of his car, stacking them carefully until there was no room left. The sky above was clear, the kind of sky that mocks the heaviness of human decisions. He drove in silence through long suburban roads, the hum of the engine the only sound between his thoughts. He reached Serena's parents' home and parked at the curb. Her father, Leonard, an aging man with a stern face softened by time, came out to meet him, wiping his hands on a towel. Her mother, Patricia, appeared behind him, worry forming in her eyes. Rashad, Leonard said, puzzled but polite. This is a surprise. Is everything all right? Rashad nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. I came to return something that belongs here. He opened the trunk and carried the boxes inside, one by one. Leonard followed in silence, his expression careful. When the last box was set down, Rashad reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 manila envelopes. He held them out to Leonard. This one is her divorce document. It is final, already signed. He tapped the second. And this contains the reason why. Leonard did not take them immediately. His eyes searched Rashad's face for anger, but there was none, only calm resolve. I am not here to make a scene, Rashad said softly. I respect you both too much for that, but I thought it right that the truth returns home the same way she left. Unannounced, Patricia covered her mouth, eyes glassy, and Leonard finally took the envelopes. Rashad gave a faint nod, stepped back toward the door, and added, I hope you will take care of her when she comes back. She will need it. He left before they could ask questions. The drive back felt strangely light. For the first time in months, he realized he was no longer replaying conversations in his head. The words had stopped. He stopped at his bank branch downtown, walked in, and greeted the manager with quiet politeness. I need to revoke all shared access and deactivate all supplementary cards immediately. The manager, surprised but discreet, nodded. Within minutes, the connection tying her name to his accounts vanished. By evening, the city glowed amber. When he pulled into his driveway, the house waited for him with still air and empty rooms. He went inside, loosened his tie, and set the new keys on the counter. He opened the cabinet in the living room corner and pulled out a bottle of aged whiskey, a gift from a client he had never opened. He poured a glass, the liquid catching the gold of the sunset. He sat in the quiet, turning the glass in his hand. The first sip burned slightly, a warmth that spread through him. The house felt different now, not empty but clean, reclaimed. He raised the glass again and murmured to the room, to endings that arrive on time. Morning broke over Miami Beach, scattering light across the balcony, where Serena lounged with a drink in her hand. Laughter from the night before still echoed in her head, mingling with the hum of waves below. She had convinced herself she deserved this. After the dull years at home, the routines, the repetition, now wrapped in new perfume and attention, she felt reborn. That morning, as she reached for her card to settle breakfast, the card was declined. She tried another. Declined. The receptionist smiled politely. Serena frowned, pulled another from her purse, and ran it through. Declined. The sound of that word, flat and final, seemed to echo louder than it should. It must be a system error, she said, forcing a smile. Please try again. The woman tried twice more, then shook her head. I'm sorry. It keeps bouncing back. Serena laughed lightly, brittle and awkward. She opened her mobile banking application. The screen refused to load, showing failed logins each time. Something tightened in her chest. She stepped aside and dialed Rashad's number. The line rang once, then stopped. She tried again. Nothing. The third time, an automated voice said, "The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service." She stood still, phone pressed to her ear as a slow chill spread through her. She called Nadia, then Faith. No answer. Finally, she called her mother. "Serena," Patricia said, strained and anxious. "Where have you been? We have tried to reach you since yesterday." "Mother, please relax," Serena said, half laughing. "I am fine. I have just been away with friends." There was a pause. Patricia's voice lowered and trembled. "Come home, Serena. Now." The line went dead before she could reply. By 10 o'clock, she was packing in a rush, confusion sharpening every movement. The man she had spent the week with, Kareem Walters, still slept on the bed, turned toward the window, oblivious. She looked at him a long moment, searching herself for something, guilt, longing, triumph, and found only dread. She did not wake him. She zipped her suitcase, slipped out, and drove. Hours later, the familiar streets of Rashad's neighborhood appeared through the windshield. Her pulse quickened, not from guilt but from a fear she did not yet name. The lawn was trimmed, his silver sedan in the driveway. Relief washed through her until she tried the front door. The key refused to turn. She tried again, harder. The lock did not budge. She stepped back and knocked once, twice. The new security light flicked on, casting a bright glow across the porch. She stared at the door one last time, her reflection fractured in the glass. The handle gleamed cold under her hand. She tried calling him again. The same disconnected tone. She sat in her car outside the gate for a long while, staring at the house, the home she thought she still owned. The windows were dark, the curtains closed. From where she sat, she could see a faint glimmer on the living room table, a glass that caught the light like a quiet answer. She started the engine and reversed slowly out of the driveway. The road blurred through her tears, but she kept driving. She did not know where else to go except her parents' home. By the time she arrived, the sun had fallen. Patricia opened the door first, eyes red and swollen, as if she had already cried for something she did not yet understand. Leonard stood behind her holding 2 manila envelopes. "What is going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" Serena asked, stepping inside. Leonard's voice was low and deliberate. "Rashad brought these yesterday." He handed her the first envelope. At the top, bold black letters read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The signatures were fresh. Her name and is printed clearly on every page. Her voice cracked. "He filed for divorce." Leonard did not answer. He handed her the second envelope. "Open it." Her fingers trembled as she slid out the contents. Photographs spilled onto the table. Herself on the balcony, on the beach, the man's arm around her. The flash drive followed, landing with a soft click beside the images. Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair before she could stop herself. Patricia turned away, whispering a prayer under her breath. Leonard did not raise his voice. "You left without a word. You shamed your home, your marriage, and yourself." He did not yell, did not curse, did not destroy you. He walked away like a man who finally understood what peace costs. Serena covered her face with her hands, her sobs filling the room. The flash drive lay between them, small and silent, waiting to confirm the rest of her undoing. That night, she lay awake in her old bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned without hurry. The room was the same and not the same. On the dresser sat her high school yearbook, her prom photo, a cracked glass frame with a picture of her and Rashad from their first summer. Two people who had not learned how fragile a promise can be when pride digs its heels in. She rose, opened the window, and listened to the quiet of their neighborhood, a quiet that now felt like judgment. The next morning she showered and dressed, then went to the kitchen where Patricia stood by the sink. "Mother," Serena said, voice worn thin, "may I make breakfast?" Patricia nodded without turning. Serena scrambled eggs and toasted bread, hands clumsy with effort. She set a plate on the table for her mother, then made one for herself and stared at it without appetite. "I will go to Rashad's office," she said finally. "I will ask to speak with him, just once." Patricia looked up, her eyes soft but firm. "You can try, but you cannot decide how another person will hear you." At noon, Serena stood in the lobby of Rashad's firm, palms damp, the world moving around her too brightly. She approached the receptionist. "Good afternoon. I am here to see Rashad Cole." The receptionist, a young woman with steady eyes, looked at the calendar. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Serena said. "I am his wife." The young woman hesitated, then picked up the phone and called upstairs, her voice careful. After a moment, she hung up. "I am sorry. Mr. Cole is in a client meeting." Serena swallowed. "I can wait." "I am sorry," the receptionist repeated, now gentler. "He asked that I let you know he cannot meet." Serena turned away from the desk, but stopped short as the elevator doors opened. Rashad stepped out with a client, exchanged a handshake, and watched the man leave. For one heartbeat, their eyes met. Serena did not rush him. She held herself steady. "Rashad," she said, "may I speak with you? Just 5 minutes." He looked at her, then at his watch. "There's a cafe across the street," he said. 10 minutes. She nodded and followed him out. They sat by the window at a small table. A server brought coffee. Rashad did not touch his. Serena kept her hands in her lap to stop their trembling. "I was wrong," she said, "about how I left, about what I said. I wanted to take a breath and did not think about how you would have to hold your breath to let me. I felt trapped by the sameness and thought freedom meant space alone." She swallowed. "I did not mean to humiliate you. I know what it looked like. I know what it was." He listened, expression steady, not unkind. "Why him?" he asked. She blinked at the table. "I met him through friends. It felt easy. It felt like an escape." He nodded once. "Escapes end. Homes remain, until someone decides they do not." She closed her eyes. "If there is any part of you that could forgive," he shook his head, not abruptly, just finally. "I'm not angry, Serena. I am finished." She inhaled sharply, as if the word cut. He continued, voice low. "You said you were not my property. You were right. You are not. But you were my wife. That meant something to me. It meant I built my home with the sounds of your footsteps in it. When you chose to leave, you did not just take a trip. You chose a different story. I am not in that story." She reached for a napkin and twisted it in her hands. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "An apology?" She shook her head. "No. A chance to return what I broke." He leaned back, looked out the window, then back at her. "Some things you cannot return. You can only stop taking more." Silence settled between them. In that quiet, Serena saw something she had not allowed herself to see. Not cruelty, not victory. Acceptance. Rashad stood, set a few bills under his untouched coffee, and looked at her one last time. "I wish you well." He left before she could speak again. She remained, watching the light move across the table until it reached the spot where the coffee had been and then passed it by. That evening, Rashad walked through his house slowly, pausing at the empty spaces where her shoes used to sit, at the closet with its few remaining hangers. He opened a drawer and found a letter he had written to himself the night after she left. 3 lines in his tight script. "Do not bargain with disrespect. Do not invite chaos to dinner. Choose peace, even when it costs." He folded the paper and slipped it back. Days turned to weeks. Rashad met with his crew on a new project in Midtown, the tallest building his firm had taken on. He arrived early to walk the site alone, tracing angles in his mind, seeing what did not yet exist. Work had always been a place where truth could not lie. Measurements, lines, tolerances, and load. When he returned home each night, the house felt exactly as he had left it, and that, he realized, was its own kind of mercy. Serena found part-time work at a boutique downtown while she stayed with her parents. At night, she helped Patricia with dinner, then sat with Leonard on the porch. He asked her no questions for a long time. One evening, as cicadas scratched the air, he said, "You have to live in the wake of your decisions, not drown in them. You understand?" She nodded. "I do." He looked at her a long time, then said, "Then breathe right here, not in a place you invented to run from." She returned the flash drive to its envelope without watching it. She gathered the photographs into a stack and tied them with cotton string. She placed both in a box with her marriage license, a dried rose from her wedding bouquet, and the white sundress she could not bear to touch. She slid the box under the bed and turned off the light. A month later, Rashad met Gerald at the courthouse to collect the final decree. The judge had signed. There are no disputes left to settle. Outside on the steps, Gerald said, "If you ever want to revisit terms, we can." Rashad shook his head gently. "No need." They parted with a handshake and a gratitude that did not require words. That night, Rashad invited his sister, Clarice, over for dinner. She brought her son, and the boy barreled into the living room with a toy airplane, asking if he could make it fly from the banister. "Only if you promise not to break your neck," Rashad said, smiling despite himself. Clarice watched him quietly through the meal. Afterward, when the boy fell asleep on the couch, she said, "You look like someone took a weight from your hands." Rashad considered that, then nodded. "For my chest," he said. "But hands too." Across town, Serena stood in the laundry room, folding towels while Patricia chopped onions in the kitchen. The scent of onions and butter carried through the small house. "Mother," she called softly, "do you need anything?" Patricia answered, "Bring me the paprika." Serena brought it and lingered. "Mother," she said, "how do you ask forgiveness when the person does not want to hear it?" Patricia turned, rested a hand on her daughter's cheek, and said, "You ask it from yourself first. Then you earn it from your life." Serena pressed her lips together and nodded. In late autumn, Rashad took a weekend drive to the coast near Savannah. He stood by the water, the Atlantic stretched flat and endless. He did not put words to what he felt. He did not have to. He drove back with the windows down, the air cool and salt-tinged, and when he reached his house, it felt like a place with a heartbeat again. Winter brought early dusk and a new quiet. Rashad took up piano in the evenings, following a tutorial with patient persistence. He taught his fingers scales, then chords, then the simplest hymns he could remember from his childhood. One night, as he found the line of a melody without thinking too hard about it, he realized he had gone a whole day without remembering the sound of Serena's laughter. He sat back, hands resting on his knees, and let that realization pass through him like weather. Noticed, accepted, gone. Serena found a small apartment above a bakery and moved in after the holidays. It smelled like sugar at dawn and yeast by night. She bought a second-hand couch, a new set of white plates, and a ficus she named Patience. She started walking before sunrise, then made coffee and wrote lists on index cards. Groceries, rent, calls to return, and beneath those, smaller lines that said things like keep promises and do not flee your life. She kept the list in a jar by the door. One Sunday, she saw Rashad across the produce aisle at a market. He was choosing apples, rolling one in his palm, as if testing its weight. She stood still. He looked up and saw her, and for a second both were simply people in a market with lists to complete. She offered a small, actual smile. He nodded, not coldly, and turned back to the apples. She did not approach. They finished their errands like strangers who knew each other's ghosts. In spring, Rashad finalized a design for a public library expansion, a project that had languished for years. At the groundbreaking, he stood with a hard hat under his arm while the mayor spoke about civic memory and quiet places for learning. When it was his turn to talk about light wells and reading rooms, he did not mention the winter in his own chest that had finally thinned. He just described the building they would raise, a place to shelter thought. Serena visited her parents every other Sunday. Leonard showed her how to repair a leaky faucet, then how to replace the wax ring on a toilet. "You might not have to," he said, tightening a bolt, "but you should know how." She laughed once, an honest sound, and said, "Teach me anyway." They finished under the sink, hands wet and faces smudged, and Leonard put a hand on her shoulder. "You are learning to stay," he said. She nodded. "I am." One evening, Serena found an old voice message from Rashad, recorded years earlier. He had called from a hotel while on a work trip and said, I saw a chair in the lobby that reminded me of the first place we lived. Sharp angles and useless comfort. I wanted to tell you that we have done better than that chair. She listened twice, then deleted it, not in defiance, but because memory had done its work. She sat by the window, the bakery lights below turning off one by one, and whispered, "I will do better than that chair." Summer came, and with it a heat that pressed on everything. Rashad hosted a cookout for his crew, and they packed his backyard with folding chairs and voices. Someone asked about the piano in the living room. He said he was learning. "Play something," a junior designer said, grinning. "No," he said, smiling back. "Not today." He fetched more ice, refilled cups, and let the laughter rise and fall around him like a safe tide. Serena received a small envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a beam of sunlight falling across an empty dining table, two place settings where one had been cleared away. On the back, in careful handwriting, were 3 words: "Choose peace now." She turned the photo over and stared at the light on the table. The way it made emptiness look almost noble. She placed the photograph in the jar with her index cards and stood very still in her kitchen until the kettle whistled. In time, they became what they had needed to become, 2 separate people who had finally stopped cutting each other with their need to be right. In time, the story of a woman who left and a man who answered with quiet boundaries lost its sharp edges and settled into the kind of narrative one does not retell for drama, but for clarity. If anyone asked Rashad what happened, he would say, "We were married. We broke apart. I chose peace." If anyone asked Serena, she would say, "I left. He let me go. I am learning to stay in my own life with my own word." On a late afternoon when the sky hung bright and thin, Rashad stood at his window and watched a neighbor's child chase a paper kite down the street. The kite snagged on a low branch and fluttered there, stubbornly hopeful. He found himself smiling. The piano waited downstairs, and there was a melody he had almost found the night before. He left the window, walked to the instrument, and placed his fingers on the keys with the same patience he had used to mend his life. Across the city, Serena watered the ficus and pressed her palm against its leaves. The bakery below turned off its mixers, and the quiet rose through the floor. She sat at the little table by the window and wrote on an index card, "Keep the lock you earned." She set the card in the jar and, for the first time in a year, did not feel the impulse to run anywhere. She lifted her head, breathed in, and let the room's small, faithful light hold. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.